All right, so hi everyone. Today I want to talk about this model or this framework that I've been thinking about and been working on, or how I think about how we come to understand the world around us. And so in this framework, both religion and science are kind of on equal footing. And so today I want to talk about what this framework is and how I kind of understand it, and then together with kind of what the goal of each of these frameworks are and how I think that they're the same goal. And then this is going to relate actually to my previous video where I talk about um, how science has forgotten its roots and that science is actually fundamentally a Christian idea, and that the goal of science is actually this idea of theosis. And so I argue that in the previous video. I'll leave a pin to it somewhere on the screen, so you can go check that video out if you'd like. And then today I want to kind of flesh this video out more, and it's going to be more technical, and I'm coming at it from like a framework models perspective. And so here on screen is the framework, but I'll dive into this. So to get started, I first want to zoom in on this side. So this is what I am classifying as phenomena, where it's like kind of particular events. And so what I would say is this is actually all you encounter in the real world is phenomena and particular events. So like an example of this in science would be something like if you put water on the stove, it'll boil. You heat it up, right? And then, you could postulate, okay, well, maybe if I put a different substance on there, if I put oil on the stove, it'll boil also, right? But then these are particular events that happen. Or another thing, when I squeeze my toothpaste tube, toothpaste will come out. So that's the event that you have. And then from that event, though, you have this list of phenomena that happens as you encounter the world, like a list of experiences that I'm classifying as phenomena. But then we observe patterns in the phenomena. And so those patterns, though, they're kind of like general principles. So you might say something like, okay, once you've put water on the stove and you see that it boils, and then you put oil on the stove and you see that it boils, you might postulate something like all liquids on the stove, when I heat them up hot enough, will boil, right? But now that's a general class, so that's in the next category, which I'm calling models here. And these models, so when you're encountering the world, you don't actually encounter the model. You don't encounter the idea that all liquids boil when you heat them up. All you have is the particular case. So when I heat up a particular liquid, it actually boils. But then, because there's a pattern in it, that it seems like so far every liquid that I put on the stove and I heat up, it boils, you might postulate that every liquid satisfies this property. But now this is in the realm of model, and it's a generalization. And so generalizations, you can't prove them. All you can do is falsify them. And this is kind of the idea of science, is that you can't actually prove anything scientifically. All you can do is falsify a scientific model, right? Because you can't actually test every single liquid that you could possibly imagine to see if it'll boil, but you'll write down a model and you'll say, okay, I believe that that's the case. And so you have kind of faith in the model. And then, if you boil a particular liquid and you heat it up and it never boils, then it's going to kind of falsify that model. But the idea is then, we have these categories of phenomena, and then we're putting them into models to understand kind of the general pattern that links different phenomena together. Like there's a pattern that emerges out of the phenomena that we encounter, and we're trying to extract out a general pattern that applies to like a large set of phenomena. And then so those I'm calling models. And then these models you can classify further into categories. So we have different types of classes of models, right? So we have models about science. We have physical models, right? So we have models in the realm of physics. You might talk about things like, boiling water, and that would be in the realm of, within physics, the model is under the umbrella, say, of thermodynamics, right? But then you could also talk about what happens when you throw an object, right? And then gravity affects the object. So then that's going to be under the model of, let's say, gravity, but it's also still in this category of physics. So then the idea is you have these particular phenomena, there's patterns in the phenomena, and then from that we extract out a general principle. And that general principle is a model of what will happen. And it's kind of like what we anticipate will happen, an expectation of what will happen when we actually act out a particular phenomena. And then the validity of the model is, does it make the correct prediction? So now when I actually do the experiment and I try to boil something, does it actually boil? And if so, then that, supports the model. Otherwise, it falsifies the model. And then these models fit into categories. So another category, instead of physics, you could talk about like the, models of like political theories, right? So like political science is in a different category than physics. It talks about different phenomena. It talks about different approaches. And then you could talk about, interpretations of literature. You could talk about, the Bible and religious categories. You can talk about, there's a bunch of different kinds of categories that each within it have different models of different phenomena that you'll experience. And so we can cluster the models again into categories. And now the thing about a category is that a category actually embeds you in a framework to understand the world. So a particular category, like what differentiates a model from a category, is a category comes with a way to understand the world around you, and a lens and a worldview to anchor yourself within, to view the world around you. Like physics comes with this idea that, everything is kind of natural, and there are these laws of physics that kind of dictate, the world around us, and that there's a order to it, and it can be described by the language of mathematics, and that, fundamentally everything is made up of atoms, and atoms are described by quantum mechanics, so everything's described by quantum mechanics. And something like this, and it endows you with a worldview on how you engage with the world and come to understand it. And so that's what separates a category from model. And then there's kind of this last chunk that I'm calling like the source. And so the idea is, when something happens and you want to ask, why did that happen? Like you can ask that question forever in some sense. Like you could say, like when I heat the water up, it boils. Why does it do that? It's like, oh, well, the melting temperature of water is 100 degrees Celsius. Well, why is it 100 degrees Celsius? Oh, because it has, these particular type of chemical bonds between hydrogen and oxygen. Why does it have the chemical bonds like that between hydrogen and oxygen? Right? You can keep asking this question, why, until you hit like kind of the root of it, or what I'm calling the source. And the source is kind of reality itself. So it's like, we encounter a phenomena, we observe a pattern in the phenomena that we encounter. We can classify these models into categories, but then ultimately what they're trying to get at is to understand the source of everything, like the actual physical and natural, I guess it's not even just physical, but just the world around us, like being itself, existence itself, like reality itself. And it's trying to, the source is the true reality, and then these two layers of category and models, they're a conception and a belief system about reality. And then phenomena is the actual experiences that we encounter. And so when you put all these together, this is kind of this model that I'm saying. And this is the model of how we come to understand things. And then the kind of a mathematical note here, what I say is, there's like this hierarchy here, where it's, I'm saying that there's only one source. Like there's one reality. We live in one reality. But then, like in a general framework that you have, there can be multiple categories, and then there can be multiple models and multiple phenomena. But I'm saying the number of phenomena that you encounter, it has to be greater than the number of models. Otherwise, your model's useless. Like the model needs to be a general pattern that encapsulates a class of phenomena. All right? And then, if you're an astute mathematician, this has to be, less than or equal to, because they could be equal in size, but they definitely, the inequality can't be the reverse case. Like you can't have more models to describe less phenomena. Then your model is essentially useless. Like you want one model that describes many phenomena, and then you want one category that contains multiple models. And so there's this nesting in it, but then the source, there's only one reality that we're trying to come to understand. And so this is the idea of the model here. And so to make this more concrete, so like one example is if we take physics. So physics is a category. Right? And so physics as a category, there's different models in it. So there's different like sub-branches of physics, like there's electromagnetism and mechanics and gravity, etc. And then these different models explain different phenomena. So you can explain properties of materials, and if you melt ice, it becomes liquid, and you can boil that off into gas, etc. Or if I throw an object, gravity and mechanics are going to tell us, what happens to that object and the trajectory it's going to take, and electricity and magnetism, if you take two magnets, why do they attract each other? That comes out of this theory. And so the idea is that these are the phenomena that occur. There's patterns in the way that they occur, we abstract them into models, and we classify these models. So there's kind of like subcategories of physics. Like, so within physics, you'll take a course, you take, kind of a intro to physics course, you'll take a course in mechanics, and then one in electromagnetism, and then kind of modern physics, which includes some of these other topics. But that's the idea. But now there's also this kind of like other goal that we want to try to unify the models. And so this has happened in physics. So like, for example, the introduction of quantum theory, when we kind of discovered quantum mechanics, this actually unified multiple theories together, and it put electromagnetism and thermodynamics and actually special relativity all under one umbrella. And so now we have like one model, quantum theory, that explains a larger set of phenomena. It's kind of like, it's like a super model that, kind of has unified multiple models together, and has been, and so this model is now kind of more a more refined model that contains more phenomena and has more explanatory power. And so, like on this previous slide I showed you of physics, this is kind of a more outdated, like kind of like classical physics view. But then the modern view of physics is something like this, where you have the category physics, but then you only have two models, and you have quantum theory and you have general relativity. And then like one of the biggest open questions in physics is, how do we unify quantum theory and general relativity? And that's kind of the goal. And then if we achieve that, in some sense, what we could say is that we've actually unified physics to have physics in only one model inside physics. And that model contains everything in the category physics. And so that's kind of like the goal of physics is to do this, or at least that's one goal of physics, is to try to, find a way to unify all the models into one, unified theory is what we call it. And, Einstein kind of posed this question of, can you unify quantum theory and general relativity? And it's kind of been one of the open questions of modern physics today is this possible, and how do we do it? And then, so, is there actually a theory here that you can encapsulate quantum theory and general relativity into to make like a unifying theory? And so like some examples of this might be string theory. Like maybe string theory is the correct answer. So string theory is a proposal to actually unify quantum theory and general relativity. And so that's an example of, then you would have this case, in some sense, like just the theoretical framework of physics would be done in some sense, because we've unified all the models into a single model that explains all phenomena in the category of physics. All right, so then another example that you can see the same kind of structure actually in Christianity. So Christianity is also what I'm calling a category in this framework. And so in Christianity, we do have a unified model, and what I'm calling a model in this language is the Bible, right? So kind of in the religious language, I would say instead of a category, we might call it just a religion. And the religion endows you with a worldview and a framework to understand the world around you in the same way that science does. And then instead of a model, we have what I'm calling a story. But a story is a model about modes of being. If you act this way, this will happen. And then so the Bible gives us answers and, is a model to explain certain phenomena, like what was the creation of all this? And then, what is the end of being going to be like? And so the apocalypse, and it gives you what's the meaning of life and what's the point of all this and that we're doing. And then it tells you a bit of how to act, and, like sinful acts are ones that are going to lead to more suffering and going to divide us and isolate us, and holy acts are ones that are going to unify us and give us, a meaningful good life. And it describes phenomena like soul or resurrection or other things like this. And so these are kind of also phenomena that you're going to encounter as you act through the world. But the phenomena are now just kind of in a different category than physics, where we're talking about kind of like, like internal subjective things, like my experience and how do I engage with the world, and how do I, kind of, the phenomena is something like acting out different modes of being, right? So if you believe that there's like actually some kind of model that describes if I act a particular way, a certain thing will happen, then like what I'm saying is Christianity gives you a model and a framework to understand such relationships between the way that you act and the outcomes that happen. And so it has a similar structure. But then the Bible itself, in a similar way to like physics, the goal is, maybe string theory, for example, might unify quantum theory and general relativity. The Bible, in some sense, is actually a unification of other things, right? So like the Bible is a story, but it has embedded in it sub-stories, and each sub-story kind of tells you, like, has explanatory power and describes different phenomena. right? So Genesis, one of the key elements of Genesis is it's, definitely the story of creation, which is talking about the origin of how the world came to be in some sense. And then so Exodus and Revelation, they talk about different phenomena, but then there's kind of like, there's all these different stories, which are different models, and then they're all under the umbrella of the Bible. And so then the Bible is kind of like the supermodel, and in Christianity, you have an identification between the category and the model, or like, the religion and the story, in that they're one and the same thing, in that, you kind of have one model or one story to kind of use to explain all these different phenomena. All right, so now to return to this, what you could imagine now is kind of as we come to understand the world, like what we're hoping for. So we saw this in physics, like the goal is trying to unify the different models of physics. We want to, one of the goals of physics is trying to get quantum theory and general relativity under the same umbrella and have some model that describes all phenomena in physics. And then in religion, if you look at something like the Bible, it's a model for all phenomena in the category of religion. But now, I'm describing two different categories. I'm describing physics as a category, and I'm describing Christianity as a different category. But then you can imagine a unification of the categories as well. And you could say, like, in some sense, this is a goal that we're seeking. And then, in some sense, what I would say, the ideal that we have, that we're seeking in this framework to try to understand the world, is actually this picture I show here, where there's one source, there's one category, inside that one category, there's only one model, and that model explains all things, all phenomena. And what I would say is, if we achieve this, if we get to the point where we have only one model that explains everything, and that model is embedded only in one category, and that then this structure here, and this explains everything, then this is like the idea that I would say of theosis. And so I'm calling this kind of like mathematical theosis, because this is like the intellectual endeavor. And I would say, kind of, from this framework, you can understand Christianity and physics in the same framework here. And then what I would say is that physics, its goal is to achieve this. That's the desire that's driving physics, is to be a singular category with only one model that describes all things. And if we achieve that, that's equivalent, I'm saying, to the Christian idea of theosis. And now, to kind of wrap this up, the question that I am asking, and I would say that this is kind of the question that grips me and that I'm curious about these days, is it true? Now, like, suppose that this perfect framework exists where you only have one category and one model. The question is this category physics? And if it is physics, then what I would say is this physics worldview is complete. But if there's any phenomena that lie outside of physics that the framework and the worldview of physics cannot come to understand, then that would mean that there must be another category or a super category that physics is embedded within. And so, I would say when I started my physics journey, I had this belief that this category was physics and that you could explain all things with physics. And I would say now my belief is not that. My belief is actually that there are things in the world that have an order and a pattern to them that are outside the realm of what physics can come to know. And if that's the case, what it means is that physics cannot be the category. And then what I would say, kind of what I am interested in and what kind of is driving my desire and what I'm like intellectually engaged in with these days, is trying to understand, what is this category? What is the singular category that all phenomena are embedded within? And then the idea is, when you achieve this, in some sense, what I would say is actually that, like, if you have a model that explains everything, it ceases to be a model. At that point, there's no distinction between the model and reality itself. And so if you understand all things, then, like, in some sense, that means you've been reunited with God, because you've come to know God himself, the creator of everything, because you understand everything. So that's like the tie between the goal of science in some sense and then the goal of Christianity. And so this idea in Christianity is the idea of theosis. And I'm making a claim that these are actually the fantasy that's kind of driving these two endeavors is the same fantasy. And now, so kind of the question I'm asking, I don't believe it's physics, but is it Christianity? And I don't know. I don't know. And it could be, it could not be. My belief is probably not, actually. Like, it's not any of the religions we have today, because I still think that they're in the realm of trying to understand, and it's a particular model. And I also don't think it's physics. And so what I think is that there's actually some new category, either that embeds Christianity or maybe Islam or some unification of Christianity and Islam, embed it with science into some super category that represents this singular category. And then what I would say is kind of the question that drives me is trying to understand what this category actually is.